I thought we would start today actually at the conclusion of your book. Many people in my audience are familiar with The Creature from Jekyll Island. They're familiar with central banking. We talk a lot about central banking. We talk a lot about the nature of money. But I wanted to just read some excerpts from the conclusion to your book and then ask you a really broad question about the overall thesis. So at the end of your book, you enumerate 7 reasons we should abolish the Federal Reserve System, which are: it is incapable of accomplishing its stated objectives. It is a cartel operating against the public interest. It is the supreme instrument of usury. It generates our most unfair tax. It encourages war. It destabilizes the economy. And it is an instrument of totalitarianism. And as you conclude the book, you write, "The creature has grown large and powerful since its conception on Jekyll Island. It now roams across every continent and compels the masses to serve it, feed it, obey it, worship it. If it is not slain, it will become our eternal Lord and Master. Can it be slain? Yes, it can. How will it be slain? By piercing it with 1,000,000 lances of truth. Who will slay it? 1,000,000 crusaders with determination and courage. Crusade has already begun." So I want to ask you just a very broad question about the book, given that conclusion. What is The Creature from Jekyll Island? Why is it malevolent to the core? And what can be done about it?
Well, basically, all 3 questions were answered to some extent by the list that you just reviewed. The core to the answer of what it is an understanding of what a cartel is. A lot of people today think that a cartel is, well, that's the drug cartel. They associate that word with drug cartel today. And but of course, the word cartel is a long-term legitimate word to describe a grouping of commercial interests, any kind. Could be drug, but mostly in the real world, drug cartel is a relatively minor player compared to banking, for example. It's a conglomeration or grouping of independent business enterprises which have decided to stop competing with each other and join together and cooperate to control their mutual market, to eliminate competition so that they can increase their profits and not have to worry about competing with newcomers and so forth. In other words, to improve their profits and to eliminate the choice of the consumer. So cartels are logical evolution of business enterprises. And as long as government stays out of it, they don't last very long because competition always creeps in and somebody else wants to be the chief dog. And so first thing you know, they have another competitor and another one. And finally, you're back to the free market again. But when government steps in, because members of the cartel are very wise in this regard, they spend a tremendous amount of their profit money to buy politicians. And they buy the politicians who write laws which sound to the public like they're wonderful because they're protecting the people and assisting the economy and improving a standard of living and all that sort of propaganda. But in reality, it's just to prevent the public from having a choice in these matters. And so cartels always get together and they fix prices and share markets and so forth to the detriment of the consumer. And so the Federal Reserve, in answer to the first question, is what it is. It's a cartel. It's no different than a banana cartel, a drug cartel, an oil cartel. It happens to be a banking cartel. So that's what it is. And people understood that, and they understood that it is not an agency of the federal government. It is a private organization, which is a stunning reality. It certainly was to me. Most people find that hard to believe. But the Federal Reserve is a conglomerate or a cartel of private banks. And these banks the bankers were so wise in their actions that they, back in 1910, they began the propaganda campaign to draft and create the Federal Reserve. And then in 1913, they actually passed it into law. It meaning the Federal Reserve Cartel Agreement. And there's a little history involved there. That's why I call my book The Creature from Jekyll Island, is because it's not because Jekyll Island has a creature that comes out of the slimy lagoon or anything like that. It's worse. It's because the Federal Reserve comes out of this private, very secret meeting that took place on Jekyll Island, which is a real island off the coast of Georgia back in 1910. And it's made up of representatives of the largest banks in the United States with their connections, their brotherhood in the big banks in Europe as well. So it was done in secret, private organization of bankers coming together, agreeing not to compete with each other anymore and to form like a labor union for plumbers or something like that. They're going to regulate their economy, so make it cushy for the plumbers that you've got to pay the same rate to all plumbers or they have to charge the same rate and so forth. And so you can't have any plumber's coming in and says, well, I can do that cheaper because he gets drummed out of the union if he does that. He's not in the union in the first place. So they formed this banking cartel on Jekyll Island, and that was the beginning of it all. And then they took this cartel agreement that they drafted among themselves to benefit themselves in the economy. They took it to Washington, and they took 3 years to convince the congressmen there and the senators that this would be a great opportunity for them to become statesmen and vote for it and stabilize the economy and all that sort of thing. When in fact it was a private cartel agreement. And I don't think many of those congressmen and senators really understood that at the time. They just thought it was a piece of legislation that they didn't understand, but surely the bankers understood it. And so they just eventually all buckled under, and they voted for it into law in 1913. So coming to the conclusion of this long ladder of information is that they have a cartel agreement to preserve and expand the power of the banks, a private agreement. They take it to Washington. They convince the politicians to pass the private agreement into law called the Federal Reserve Act. Now, a private agreement suddenly becomes law of the land. And so if you and I do not abide by the terms of the private agreement, we can go to prison. But it's not a government creation. It's a private creation. But the government just was stupid enough, these congressmen were idiots enough, to sign it into law to give it the power of the government. So it was a partnership, in another way of looking at it, between the politicians, the political scientists, and the monetary scientists. That's what the Federal Reserve is, a cartel and a partnership between the bankers and the politicians. So that probably tells you enough right there if you understand what's going on in the world. But the details beyond that are extremely fascinating. So the other parts of your question is jumping to the end, what can be done about it? I use the metaphor of 1,000 spears, or what was the word I used? Knives or something to cut it.
A million lances of truth.
Lances of truth, yeah. Well, yeah, but it takes more than truth, Robert. There's an old saying, which I used to use a lot, and then I began to realize that it was a bunch of bunk. The old saying is that truth will ultimately prevail if enough energy is spent to bring it to light. And that's not true, because truth by itself has a great deal of power. But if men are cowardly to stick to the truth, it fails. So it takes courage besides truth. It takes manly action. It takes a strong stance. It takes organization. It takes the acquisition of political power, because you're fighting political power. And truth by itself is not strong enough. You have to take that truth and convert it into action. And this is something that took me a long time to realize over the years, that we've had the truth. People like me, long before me, have been yelling the truth, screaming it from the housetops, but nobody heard it because it was banned in a way. It was not popular. So most people, including myself, never heard the truth. You've got to hear the truth. No. And then we see today people know a lot of truth, but they're afraid to act on it.
So back to what you were saying earlier. So cartels, groups of competitors that come together that decide to stop competing with one another for their collective benefit, right? So they can move towards an oligopoly or monopoly, perhaps, charge higher prices, deliver lower quality services. But that doesn't work in a free market, because as you said, in a cartel, there are incentives to defect, right? If everyone's price fixing, well, then I have an incentive to go and charge a lower price and therefore get more market share. So the cartel needs some kind of government intervention or violent intervention to persist.
It does, yeah, to preserve it, because otherwise there'll be mavericks that will break away.
Yes.
Yeah. So cartels always seek legislation to support their cartel agreement, to make it sound good, so the gum-chewing public won't know any better. They say, "Oh yeah, well that's good." Like we have a new law that fixes the price of milk so that everyone can afford milk. We need milk for little babies, and so we need the government to fix the law to guarantee that everybody can. The prices, so that everybody can afford milk. Well, that's the way it's sold. But it turns out the other way around, that the law makes sure that the milk producers can't reduce the price of their milk lower than a certain level. That's what the law actually does, but the people don't know it. And so all the dairies are required to charge at least this amount and that amount for their milk, even though they would be prepared to go lower in a competitive market. So it's all a lie.
Excellently said. And then also something that's important here, I think the American Revolution was largely an escape from the Bank of England, right, to a large extent. So we were trying to get out from under the central bank of England at the time. The U.S. was founded as a constitutional republic without a central bank. We're this decentralized governance model.